So welcome to the Market Mentors podcast, Rin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on here.
Absolute pleasure. So before we get stuck into this one, I'd love to know what your relationship is with content marketing.
It's my bread and butter. It's what we do. I started my career as a journalist. I've always been a writer, and I've always loved communicating with people in a way that engages them, except back when I started like 20 odd years ago, we weren't saying engaging. It was just, write good stuff and people would read it. And so I think I've brought that approach. When you're a journalist, you're writing, people are reading what you're reading purely for the pleasure of reading or being informed or being entertained or something. So that's what I've brought into content marketing. And I love the fact that over the last 20 years, I've seen content marketing grow as, its own thing. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's such a big play, isn't it? For certainly in our audience, B2B tech companies, content is king is the phrase, isn't it? So it's so important these days.
Can you believe that phrase is from the 90s?
Yeah, and especially for companies' growth as well. Like you're talking about being a journalist, it's quite different from being a content marketer for a B2B organization because, okay, you've got to produce really good stuff, but it's also then got to move the needle in terms of revenue. But it's nice to be able to have an impact on a business in that way. Which kind of brings us on to what we're here to talk about, which is kind of expertise-based positioning and how to create content for the C-suite. A big challenge for a lot of our audience. And this is your specialty, Rin, and your agency has done some research on this, which we'll dig into in a bit. But first off, when we're talking about sort of expertise-based positioning, when you describe someone as an expert, then what do you mean by that?
It's a really interesting one, and it's something we've spent a lot of time looking into and a lot of time reading about. So one of my favourite books that I've read on the subject is called Expert by a guy called Dr. Kneebone, which I think is the best name. He's a surgeon and he's called Dr. Kneebone. But looking at that kind of journey and how you become an expert and what that looks like, and he kind of takes you through this process of being an apprentice to being a journeyman, which is kind of being kind of good but not an expert yet, and then to what he calls master, so sort of the expert level. I guess it's thinking about there's knowledge base and there's skills base, so you can kind of be an expert in two different things. You might have, if you're a professor, it's very knowledge based, generally speaking. You might be an expert carpenter, so you're very good at doing something. You might not be able to explain it, but you can do it kind of practically with your hands. But also being an expert isn't something that you like, right, today I got to be expert level and that's it. You might get, your doctorate or whatever it is and sort of reach a degree of advancement, but actually expertise is constantly evolving. So, it's a bit of a grey area as to when you become an expert. And also, I guess, thinking about the difference between expertise and authority, because authority is how people perceive you. So you may know that you're an expert, but if nobody else knows that, then that's not especially helpful. So the only people that are going to understand that, in a B2B context, are the people you're already working with. And I think where content comes into it and what we do is very much taking that expertise and then articulating it in a way that builds authority. So you're proving it.
And do you think most organizations, let's think of our organizations and B2B tech companies, do you think in most of those companies there will be an expert somewhere then, or?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Otherwise they're just making it up as they go along. But yeah, normally, so we talk about the subject matter experts within the business. And interestingly, that might be a founder, it might be a CTO, it might be the product team, whoever it is. But yeah, there'll be that group of people, and it's really interesting, like that interplay between marketing and communications and those experts, because just because they're experts in some sort of technology or finance or whatever it is, that doesn't mean that they're good communicators, which is always the challenge for marketing.
Yeah, I can imagine actually getting their time as well, I would have thought. But before we sort of dive into the practical side then, and we'll sort of get onto that in a bit, but in terms of the research that you've done, and I'll put a link in the podcast post and our blog post to this research, but at a high level then, what was the research focused on?
Very simply, what do CXOs actually read? it all came out of chatting to somebody once, and they were like, right, what we really want is we want a blog post that CFOs are going to read in their lunchtime, in their lunch break. And the first thing my colleague said to them was like, well, actually, CFOs don't really take lunch breaks, and her husband's a CFO. So that was fun. But that sort of led to a discussion kind of internally for us, which was, but yeah, what do they actually read? You know, do they read blog posts? Do they read white papers? Are they on LinkedIn? Do they read anything? And if they do read things, you know, what are they looking for? And we thought, well, that's something we'd like to know more about. We know our audience would like to know more about it. So let's find out. And so we did a survey and a bunch of interviews with, you know, we were very fortunate to get hold of people at the likes of, you know, Card Factory and the Very Group. So really kind of high up people in kind of enterprise level businesses. And yeah, just dug into their brains, really. It was really fun.
Yeah, well, it's the first bit, isn't it? Understanding your audience. So you know, it's a good report. And for people creating, and in terms of when you were talking to them, then, because you know, we can have our perception of the C-suite and how they consume content, but when you were talking to the C-suite, and for people who are creating this content, trying to get in front of these people, then what must they do? What sort of content kind of resonates? What sort of came through in the report?
Yeah, it was really interesting when you think about the buyer journey. Often you think about an individual. So like if you're B2C, you're thinking, okay, I don't know, so and so needs to buy a new washing machine. What's their buyer journey look like? But in B2B, there's normally different people getting involved at different stages in that journey, and the C-suite are not really involved in the detail of, you know, choosing suppliers. Particularly, they'll have teams that'll do that, and they might get involved in the later stages of actually, you know, signing off on, yep, that sounds good, or, you know, but somebody in their team would be presenting to them. What we found interesting was that actually they're more at the beginning. They kind of, one of the concluding kind of thoughts in the report is that they're the agenda setters. So they're the ones that are going to go, do you know what, we really need to be focusing on, I don't know, digital transformation, talent pipelines, whatever. This is so the two things that came out of the research was that, one, they're big picture thinkers. So they are like, okay, I've got a team of, you know, so a CFO, I've got a team of 100 people in my team. How can I be a good leader? How can I help them do their jobs properly? What's the structure of the business that will support them delivering the work? Because actually at that level, you're not doing the work as such. You're facilitating and overseeing, and you're more in that kind of systems and structures kind of side of things. But also then, so big picture and also horizon scanning. So they're the ones that are looking to the future and going, do you know what? I can see this trend coming up here over the horizon. It's kind of, you know, a captain the ship looking and kind of going, there's a cloud over there, and it's not going to come today, but in a week from now, or in a business context, 5 years from now, we need to be prepared for that. And I think that's the useful thing for content creators to think, rather than going, right, I need to convince that CXO to buy my software. Don't do that. Think, okay, my software is about enabling, you know, employee wellness. I need to make sure that employee wellness is on their agenda. So then you're writing in a very different way, because you're not trying to sell a product. You're trying to convince them that, like, think about your employee wellness. This is why it's relevant to your business. This is the way the world is changing. If you want to keep your talent pipeline filled up, you need to be thinking about it. From there, they'll set the agenda in their business, and then you can sell your product to people below them.
And I found it quite interesting in the report when they were talking about, you know, the how technical you should be describing something, and actually to describe things very simply and very clearly, because I think sometimes you can fall into the trap of, okay, well, I am marketing or writing something for the C-suite, therefore it needs to be filled with really complicated words to show off how I understand their subject or this space or whatever it might be, when in fact it's actually the opposite by the sounds of it.
Yeah, sure. In fact, actually, made sure I pulled out the quote because I wanted to talk about it. So I'm glad that you've kind of pulled on that. So it was the CFO of the Very Group who said that often the content that he sees, and this is a direct quote, he says, it overestimates the level of technical interest I have and underestimates the need to explain it simply. And I think people think that simple communication, clear communication, must therefore mean there's simple thought behind it, whereas actually it's the opposite, it's complex. And I always liken it to ballet. When you go and see a ballet, you see these floaty, beautiful, ethereal women just, you know, well, and men, but like floating on the stage, right? they are sports people. They have worked until their toes bleed. But you can't see that. If you see the bleeding toes, then it's not working. So I think that's what you're aiming for. You want to be so graceful that people go, wow, that's incredible. And funny enough, I've just finished a mini MBA course in marketing, and it was the Mark Ritson one. I really enjoyed the lectures because it all seemed so obvious. You'd get to the end of an hour's lecture and you go, that's really obvious, but it's not. It's based on loads of complex thinking. But actually, when it's explained well by somebody who is a good teacher, then it's simple.
Mm-hmm. And on the flip side then, what sort of stuff should we be avoiding then when we're sort of trying to communicate with the C-suite?
Definitely over-complicating things. So there are things that are complex, and you can't avoid complexity, because the danger is you go too far the other way and you sort of make it fluffy, and everything's about, transformation and saving time and money. It's like, okay, you've gone too simple. So you do want to hint at the complexity, but do it in a way that's clear. So a lot of the time, actually, for me, when you're communicating, it's about information hierarchy. So it's where design and writing kind of come together. Which bits are you going to say at which time? Start with the top level thought. Once they've bought into that top level thought, then get more complex. So as you kind of dig deeper into something, that there should be a complexity behind it, but actually that top line message needs to be quite straightforward. And the other thing is length. So the research was showing that it was around 80-something% of the respondents read for less than 2 hours a week. Now, when I say read, I don't mean like, obviously they'll have to read reports and internal things like that, but actually in terms of, marketing content, they're going to be reading for less than 2 hours a week. So again, it doesn't mean everything has to be one paragraph, because that's not realistic. They will sit down and read a 5,000 word white paper if it's relevant, but don't pad, don't add fluff and waffle for the sake of it. The more clear you can be about something, and the more concise and articulate you can be, the better.
Yeah, and actually the skim reading as well actually was quite interesting. So even if you're creating a big report, if there's a way that from a design perspective you can make it easy for somebody to sort of easily sort of skim through, is perhaps how people at this level read to get through stuff as quickly as they possibly can.
For sure. I've got a friend who runs a design agency, and he always talks about, you need to speak to the kind of the 20-second reader, the 2-minute reader, and the 10-minute reader. So actually, in a way, you need to present the information in sort of 3 different ways, and sometimes that's all in the same space. Other times, for example, you might, like in a blog post, often, especially kind of quite dense ones, long form content, especially ones that are directed at SEO, you'll have the kind of too long didn't read at the beginning. And that's just a kind of a simple example of how you can go, okay, here, if you don't have time to read it all, here are the 10 points we're making. Great, you can take those away, or the executive summary, that sort of thing. So I think having it in different formats, and I think, again, coming from a journalism background is helpful, because I worked with quite a lot in quite a lot of magazines where you had to be thinking, okay, I'm not just writing this 1,000 word feature. I also need, a pull quote. So that's where you take one line and you make it bigger. You need a box out. So that's the bit of the side which is in a box. You need to think, what are the visuals, the graphics? And we kind of call those entry points. So your entry point onto a page, if you're flicking through a magazine, what's the thing that's going to stop you? It could be the headline. It could be the subhead. It could be, the pull quote or the box out. And that will convince you that you're interested enough to actually sit and start at the beginning and read the whole thing all the way through.
Yeah, interesting. Really interesting. So hypothetical situation then. Let's say, we are talking to somebody who's working for a HR software business. They help companies with sort of onboarding or employee retention. And you're selling to typically big organizations, typically at then the C-level, sort of directors, sort of C-level upwards. If you're that marketer and you're looking to create more engaging content then for those buyers, what would you do first?
So I'd first forget about my product, and I'd think about what is it that actually the audience is interested in. So kind of with the CXO report, it's not selling what we do. It is in a way, but it's more, I guess from my perspective, it's more education. I'm educating my audience to think about, when you're asking me or my team to write you something, here's what it needs to be thinking about. Because it's always frustrating when a client will say, can you write this thing for the C-suite? We're like, we can, but it won't work. But when we did that, it came out of actually, we know that our audience is interested in this. How can we supply what they need? So think about, it could be questions you've been asked when you've been in sales kind of conversations. It could be, what are the trending topics at the moment? What are the things that are coming up? Or it could be something that is coming up as a trend, something that's changing, but maybe your audience doesn't know that. And one thing that I thought was really interesting, again, it was the same guy that I quoted before, the CFO at the very group. He was saying that it was really helpful to be told what questions he should be asking. So during, I think it was Brexit, obviously nobody knew exactly what the future was going to look like. But there was an article that he read, which he found really helpful, which was saying, okay, if you are a CFO at this time, here are the kinds of questions you need to be asking. Here are the kinds of conversations you need to be having in your business. So I guess what's common to all of those things I've just said, so to summarize in a nutshell, is what is it that they're interested in? What do they need to know? Forget your product, forget selling. You're not selling at this stage. You're trying to engage in a conversation. You're trying to build relationship, and you're trying to be helpful. You want to be an expert. You want to be helpful. And then one day in the future, and it might be 2 years from now, then there's a chance to tender for something, and you're going to be the one that go, oh, do you know, I had a conversation with that person once, and that was really helpful, or I read an article, whatever it was.
And the obvious way would be to talk to people. That's not always easy,
100%.
is it? Especially when you're talking about talking to people at this sort of level then. I mean, are there any other areas, any other sort of suggestions you would have for trying to research your audience a bit more without literally getting them on the phone then?
Having a conversation. I mean, sort of thinking about where their networks are, so who you can talk to around them. So, if you're talking to somebody in their team, and I know, if you think about like the ABM approach, account-based marketing, and you're developing that network of relationships. So you'll start off by talking to some random person who's never going to be interested in your services, but then they're going to introduce you to their mate who's in sort of the right department at least, and then they're going to introduce you to somebody more senior. So that can be one way to actually have a conversation. But even just simple things like look on LinkedIn, find, 5 CFOs that could be relevant to people that you want to talk to, or CHROs, whoever it is. What are they posting? What are they commenting on? What are they sharing? What are the conversations they seem to be having? That's a really easy one. It's basically, imagine you're at a party and you sort of go and stand next to the group of people that are chatting. Because I really think of content marketing, and particularly at the C-suite level, it's like dating. You fancy somebody, you're trying to get their attention, right? You can't just go in there going, all right, do you want to go on a date? That's not going to work. And you can't even go in there saying, by the way, did you know how amazing I am? And I've got a really cool car. It's like, that is not going to work. You need to just hang out near them, hope they spot you, be wearing cool clothes, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? So it's much more subtle and it's relationship driven. And if you go in there all guns blazing, that is not going to work, because the C-suite are always being sold to. They're like, literally, they have a radar for it. If you come in there selling, they're just going to be like, no, don't talk to me. I'm not interested. Yeah.
Fair enough. And sort of, I guess that's the first bit then, is understanding your audience better, understanding what matters to them, the conversations or the information they want to hear about then. So what about then focusing internally? I guess the next step then is perhaps thinking, okay, well, who do we have in our organization who is a subject matter expert? How do you think people could best utilize those types of people?
Yeah, no, it's really important, because I think, especially in a world of AI-driven content, right? Like, you can just everyone's churning out content. So having content doesn't mean you're going to win, right? So part of it is finding your audience. Where are they? How are you going to get in front of them? And having that, really thinking about your strategy before you even start creating content. And the strategy is, how am I going to get in front of them? What do they care about? Cool. Okay, now we've thought about that. And then subject matter experts. So who in your business knows stuff that other people don't? That's as simple as that, really. Because again, if you just need to fill, a content schedule, you can ask ChatGPT. It will give you lots and lots of articles, but it will be drawing from what's already out there, and it's fine. We sometimes we'll quote a McKinsey report or something like that. That gives things weight, because everyone goes, oh, McKinsey, great. But actually, if you can say, this McKinsey report shows that this trend is happening in society or in the economy, whatever. Here is a challenge that we know that you're likely to be facing right now. Our experts say this about it, and drawing on knowledge, experience, like real life stuff, the more real life anecdotes, it doesn't have to be full case studies. You don't even have to name people you've worked with, but like really observing things that have actually happened and kind of tying it to specifics. So making a general point and then going as an example, or just bringing in an analogy, something like that. It's really good to have a top level comment and a top level kind of perspective, but then draw it very quickly into reality. That's what makes it different.
And I guess using external subject matter experts is the same. It gives the same benefit. A good example is your own research paper itself, I guess, in that you're talking to the people. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, the people who are, people want to market to. So in a way, they are subject matter experts because they are one of the people.
Yes, exactly. And it's, or things like, sometimes I'll share on LinkedIn, I've read this book and it's really good. And I'm reading a book at the moment called Magic Words, and it's all about specific words that work in kind of in persuasion, essentially. Not everyone's going to read that book because it's quite niche, but I'm interested in that. It feeds into what I do. And so, yes, I'm an expert because I've been doing this for 20 years. Yes, I'm an expert because I've worked on many, many projects with many, many clients. I'm also an expert because I'm reading other experts. So if I'm referencing, I read X book, then people go, oh, okay, cool. You're reading it, so I don't have to. That can be really useful. But yeah, external subject matter experts can be fun. One thing we do quite a lot of for our clients is panel interviews. So we'll bring either a selection of their experts or a selection external or both, and we'll bring them together and we'll sort of chat, and then from there we'll do like a series of articles. We did one for us actually about brands and how brands evolve from the startup to scale up through that kind of journey. And we had a startup founder, we had an angel investor, we had an M&A expert, and we got them all together. We chatted. I think we got about 6 blog posts out of it in the end, because it was 2 hours of chatting. It was so interesting to find everyone's different perspectives. So yeah, there's lots of fun to be had when you talk to experts.
So we've understood our audience. We've identified some people that we could use who are subject matter experts, either in our business or perhaps externally as well. Where do we go from here then?
So I guess then it's, there's one small step, which is if you're using internal experts, trying to engage them. So that's a whole sort of other subject. So basically, sometimes they're like, yeah, great, let's get involved. Other times they're like, oh, marketing, why do we need to bother? So yeah, there's a whole other probably hour-long conversation to be had about how you engage people. But then it's creating, for me, a variety of content and trying to maximize on your kind of time and resources by doing what we call gold mining. So you're getting all that information out of the experts and then going, okay, how can we put this together? So for example, the CXO report, that's a big report. I don't know, it's 5,000 odd words. From there, we might create some blog posts. We've created LinkedIn posts. I'm doing podcast conversations. It's thinking, okay, how can we get the same information out there in different ways? Some people want to read for a long time. Some people don't. Some people want all the details. Some people just want the highlights. Some people want it visual. Some people want to listen. And so it's thinking, how can you change it in different ways? And then also, how can you be more proactive? Because I think a lot of the time we go, okay, well, I'll chuck it out on social and I'm going to get millions of readers. But it doesn't always work like that. So, I've shared the CXO report in, other agency groups, because I know that other agency owners will read it and they might share it with their clients, and podcasts. So kind of getting out in front of people like that. And then also directly. So actually I went to a pitch a month or two ago, and I got some copies printed and bound, and I took them along with, and I left them on the table. And it was great. It started loads of conversations. They were flicking through there. Oh yeah, I really like this bit. And, that's very a proactive way of using it. So I think, I'm a big fan of sales and marketing not being siloed, but, don't have the marketing team creating something brilliant and the sales team are like, yeah, whatever. The sales team are the ones that are having those conversations, right? They're actually likely to, I don't know, at a conference or whatever, to meet somebody. And conferences can be great. You can be at a conference, strike up a conversation, find out a little bit what they're interested in, and then follow up with, oh, we were chatting the other day, I thought you might be interested in this piece of research. Likewise, I find like a sort of groups on LinkedIn can be useful. So things like alumni groups, if you've been to the same uni, or, we're a B Corp, so we're in a B Corp group on LinkedIn. So I know that if I was trying to talk to a CFO or a CHRO or whatever, I would say CFO, that's not really fair. I think because a lot of people think the CFO is the one that holds the purse strings, even though actually they set the budget, and a lot of the time the budgets are in other people's control. But you can, I'm more likely to get the attention of a CFO who's of a CFO of a B Corp than one that isn't, because they're already going to be like, oh, we've got something in common, let's chat.
And in terms of sort of distribution itself, I mean, you've covered quite a bit there in terms of the sort of channels that you might use as well. But no, it's absolutely fine. But the report seemed to suggest that actually there's no kind of one medium that you should be using to get your message out to this sort of level of person, and sort of just drawing on what you talked about there. Then it's actually making sure that well, you're going to create something, a report, it could be a blog, whatever it might be, a white paper, but actually just don't rely on that on its own. You can then chop it up and make it more accessible depending on how people want to consume that sort of content.
And I think that's the sort of thing about like making sure that you've spent enough time and sometimes money on the strategy. Do the thinking. That you really do need to take time to think first, because otherwise, creating content can be a time-consuming and expensive process. So you want to make sure that you're going to get as much from it as possible. And sometimes it's luck. You randomly. Where was it? I went to an event. I heard the speaker talking. I was like, oh, that's really interesting what you said. It was nothing to do with our work at all. But as a result, we decided to have coffee. And from the coffee, we just got on really, really well. And then now we're going to be working on a project together. And it was blind luck. You just put yourself out there, you have conversations. So keeping your eyes and ears open, I think. But again, always listening out for what are they interested in? Is there something I can do to add value and be useful? It's not where can I sell myself, but or my product, my team, my whatever, but how can I be useful? How can I be interesting? How can I make their life easier? And coming at it from a very relational perspective.
Now, I agree with that. There are some companies out there that think, okay, yes, I agree with that too, but we need to see an ROI. I'm going to spend X amount on content and thought leadership and trying to create stuff for this C-suite. I need to see some kind of return then. How do you think people should be thinking about this?
God, such a difficult one. Honestly, I wish I had a really clear-cut answer for you on that, because it would really help my marketing as well. Because the problem is that brand building, it goes across so many things. It's hard to measure one thing. There are things you can measure. I would say be very clear on the types of numbers you need, because it's very easy to fall into, we all know vanity metrics, going, oh, we've got 10,000 hits on our websites. Okay, is that helpful? Thinking about search intent and all these things. I think engagement is definitely something that's useful. You can't always see it. So, one thing that we look at on LinkedIn is the seniority level of the people who are looking at our posts. So if we've got, kind of very junior level people, that's probably less helpful to us, but kind of middle manager and upwards is useful. So you can track those sorts of metrics, but again, defining those for yourselves, just not assuming like, oh, we all need to track the same metric. What is your personal goal in your business? Which metrics actually link most closely to that? And then think about them along the customer journey as well. So if you've got a piece of content that's very much top of funnel, then you're not going to get like book a demo. That's not going to be a sensible call to action, and you're not going to be able to track that. But again, if you track across the whole scale of that customer journey, you should then start to see leads or requests for demos, whatever it is. And again, it's how your sales process works. Do you have the MQL, the SQL? Like, what does that look like? One thing I will say is be realistic about timescales, because content marketing is, in brand building, it's all about reputation. It's about how people see your business. And like I said, you might convince somebody in the C-suite that they need to consider, employee wellness, for example. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be in the market to buy a new platform tomorrow. They might not be ready to do that for 2 years. So think about how you can get their attention and engage them, how you can keep them interested in you and keep, again, to go back to the dating analogy, you might get a first date, but you're not going to ask them to marry you straight away, right? So Think about that process and how long it is. Keep their attention, keep being useful and interesting, and then tweak your metrics as you go along. And ultimately, you should get leads. Thinking about timings. I'm trying to think who it was. I think it's Joe Polizzi, who founded the Content Marketing Institute. Says about 9 to 12 months, but then there was somebody else, and I've forgotten their name, that said 12 to 18 months to get results from content marketing. So thinking in the 9 to 18 month time frame for actually seeing some really tangible results.
And I think this is the mistake that some companies can fall into, or the trap, is that they're looking for too much too soon. So they're not seeing what they class as leads coming through. And like you said, it's quite difficult to track leads for this type of stuff. Much easier from an ad, or much easier when somebody visits a website. So sometimes you'll get an attribution from Google, for instance, when actually they've first heard of you somewhere else. And I don't know if you know, I don't know if you follow Rand Fishkin, CEO of SparkToro, but he very much talks about this, in that these companies are fantastic at telling you that actually their stuff is working really well because somebody's come to your website, you've remarketed to them, you've clicked on here, but what they're not telling you is that they heard of you at an event or speaking at an event the month before. So there's all this sort of stuff that goes on that you can be doing, which is making noise and getting engagement. But sometimes the attribution comes from somewhere else. So confusing.
I love attribution modeling. I think it's such a fascinating subject. It's the kind of thing you could, is it first touch point, last touch point? But actually, I think this is why, whilst I love data and it's really helpful and it's really important to use, I think it can be dangerous to get too obsessed with it. Ultimately, in any given year, how much is marketing spending? In any given year, say the next year, how much money is being made? Like, if marketing's doing well, the money is going to be made, right? But say marketing or sales, again, you have to see it together. So, is sales going to get the praise for doing the conversions, or is it going to be marketing that's going to get the praise for the leads? There's so much that goes into it. I think, you've got to see it as kind of a web of different things. But even so, things like advertising, you might with our CXO, we did some LinkedIn advertising, so then we can measure the effectiveness of the advertising in terms of how many people visited the landing page, how many people downloaded the report, and all the rest of it. Great, so I can tell you the success of my advertising. But really, it's only successful if people then read it, their mindset changes, they end up working with us. So it's very complicated. I'm very glad that I'm not in the data side of marketing.
No, indeed. And do you tend to suggest people to gate their content, or do you gate your content, or do you gate it or not gate it? Are you not that bothered either way? So it very much depends. I would say, like, some people gate case studies, and that I never understand, because case studies are your proof point. You don't want to gate those. You definitely want people just to read it. Generally speaking, I think ungated is better. If I had to just plug for one of them, with CXO, we've had it gated for a while because we wanted to kind of get some kind of insights and some people that we could kind of follow up with. But also, we will ungate it at some point in the future, because really, again, if you're doing brand building, then you just want as many people as possible to have eyes on that. I want people to share it. I want people to send the links to their mates. That's what I want to happen. And then the sales will happen from there. But then also bear in mind, I am a marketer rather than, yes, I'm the head of sales in my business, but we very much operate on an inbound strategy. I'm not trained in sales. I don't pick up the phone and, try and hassle people to use our products. I wait until somebody I know needs what we do. And then I talk to them, and then it works. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about sales strategy. Good stuff. So last question then, switching things up. If you were hiring a B2B content marketer, then what skills and attributes would you look for?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, obviously, if you assuming talking written content here, so they need to be a good writer. But it's also about being able to think through things. So that having that strategic understanding and empathy, I think actually we downplay the soft skills, but empathy is enormously important. You need to be able to, like you said, understand your audience. What is it they're struggling and put yourself in their shoes. What do they care about? So if you're coming from that very like sales driven perspective, it's not going to work. But if you can be emotionally intelligent and empathetic and understand what they need, then that's going to help you. I think certainly when you're creating, we're talking about the expertise-based content, and like if you're in marketing and you need to talk to the subject matter experts, I think the ability to be able to quickly assimilate information and then convert that into something engaging. So, we talk to our clients about embedded finance and, all sorts of crazy things that, I don't really understand. I mean, thankfully, I don't do a lot of the writing these days, but I have done in the past. But I can listen to somebody talking for half an hour and then I can go, okay, so what you mean is this, 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 and this. And they're like, yes, great. Okay. That's a real skill. And I don't know how you develop it other than just practice. That's what journalism's all about. You go into work at 9 o'clock, your editor says to you, right, I'd like you to write a story about X. You go, oh, no. So you do a bit of research, on the internet, or well, back in my day, it wasn't as much on the internet, but, and then you go, right, who can I speak to? And you phone university departments, you phone authors who've written books on the subject, and you get their perspective. So being able to take that perspective and quickly turn it into something engaging, that's a real skill you'd be looking for.
Well, I love how content's sort of evolving a little bit into this more journalistic type of content, because I think it adds a huge amount of value. And it's been really interesting to talk to you, Rin. So thanks very much for sort of sharing your knowledge, especially around this subject, which is so important for a lot of B2B companies at the moment. Some companies just can't rely on things like these traditional methods of paid ads. So content is a fantastic way to get that expertise across. So yeah, it's been a true pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's been really lovely chatting to you.